Thank you, everybody, for coming. We have a very interesting program for you today. We're going to be doing a quick intro to what we find difficult as publishers when it comes to making good, consistent decisions about manuscripts. And we're going to be talking with Richard Bennett and Nick Morley from AlchemistReview and Grounded AI, respectively, about how computers can basically help with that. So we are talking questionable citations, dubious claims, and unfortunate omissions, how AI can help plug the leaks in the peer review process, a webinar brought to you by Evidence-Based Toxicology, a new open science journal for toxicology and environmental health, and the Evidence-Based Toxicology collaboration. For those of you who've not met me before, my name is Paul Whaley, and I'm Editor-in-Chief of Evidence-Based Toxicology, and I have multiple roles at EBTC as well, including coordinating our research program. If you want to find out more about what we do, perhaps join the collaboration, sign up to a working group, receive a newsletter, you can zap the QR code in the top right-hand side of the screen. That QR code will stay throughout the first few slides of this presentation, and I will also drop a link to it in the chat in a bit. If you have any questions for the presenters, please do drop them in the chat. We're going to be doing an interactive session, so it won't be death by PowerPoint. And there's also a Q&A box if you have questions you want to put there as well, so please don't be shy. So if you've not heard about EBTC before, we were set up in 2011 with a mission to promote the use and development of evidence-based methods in toxicology, really taking a leaf out of Cochrane and its work in evidence-based medicine, but thinking about how issues like systematic review and improved reporting practices and whatnot could be introduced into the toxicology and environmental health space instead. We have 4 working groups, or 4 thematic issues that we do projects under. So we have our research methods group that concentrates on improving the conduct and reporting of primary studies. We have our evidence synthesis group, which is about understanding what the evidence says about research question toxicology, very focused on systematic review methods, really one of the pillars of evidence-based approaches in any research discipline. We have our evidence decisions group, which is about improving how evidence is used in policy making. And then the group that really has the most interests in relation to this presentation today is our open science group, which is about making research more accessible and easier to reuse by other researchers. To complete its mission, EBTC really needed a journal, of course, because to fully report research, to make data fair, to introduce open practices into the research publishing ecosystem, we really need new ways of thinking about how we work as journals. So we've set up Evidence-Based Toxicology in collaboration with Taylor and Francis as a way of introducing or experimenting with these approaches in a commercial publishing context. And it's given us an opportunity to do a lot of very interesting things in relation to handling manuscripts. For example, it helps us address publication bias through making preprints required. At EBT, we'll accept study protocols, so the planned methods for research before data's been collected. We run an open evaluation process, so the insights from peer review can be made readily available to the readers. And we run a structured review process to make sure we're consistently handling manuscripts and comprehensively evaluating their publishability. So today's webinar, we're actually going to be talking about what we struggle with, in fact, at EBT, what many journals also struggle with as well, and how hopefully AI can help. So I'm very pleased to welcome Richard Bennett from AlchemistReview and Nick Morley from Grounded AI, who are going to be talking about the various tools and technologies they have available to them. But before we do that, I think you might want a very, very quick primer on how we handle manuscripts at EBT and the specific challenges that we face as editors and when we're working with peer reviewers. So the submission process, or the manuscript evaluation process, breaks down into 3 steps. We have pre-evaluation, where triage and peer review, which you'll all be familiar with, particularly those of you who submitted manuscripts before. Pre-evaluation checks aren't really very much to do with me as editor-in-chief. These are conducted by kind of a back office team at Taylor and Francis that works across multiple titles. They're interested in making sure research isn't obviously plagiarized, that we're not getting crippled by paper mill submissions, that we're not getting kind of spam or nonsense submissions that are trying to exploit weaknesses in the publication process. So anything that isn't a genuine submission shouldn't really make its way through to me. Then when it comes to my job, I need manuscripts to be basically complete and ready for peer review to make sure that the peer review process is maximally valuable, both to the authors, but also to the reviewers themselves, because obviously peer reviewers are increasingly overworked these days. So we don't want to send them a manuscript which doesn't have all the minimum information in it they need in order to do a full evaluation on the first crack. Because you also know that the first round of peer review is the most important. Manuscript at that point already needs to be a complete work because that's where most of the comments are going to be made. And then in a sort of second and third round of peer review, it's mostly cleaning up and clarification. So to do triage well, like there are 12 basic checks that we do at EBT, and some of these are quite tricky, like checking the full names, affiliations, and ORC IDs of each author, particularly if you've got like a 20, 25 author paper, can actually be really, really hard, surprisingly, because you've got to kind of check each individual person and validate all the ORC IDs and all these kinds of things. Checking for data and code availability, that involves chasing all the links and making sure that like lists of like supplemental materials are all accurate and consistently communicated through the manuscript. Checking reporting checklists is also really hard because those are interpreted different ways by different people, and understanding whether the checklist is appropriate or complete is very challenging. And all this kind of routine work takes time away from the core task of editing, which is making sure the manuscript is something that should be published, right? To make sure that the manuscript is complete, we also check clarity about knowledge, goals, or hypotheses. We check for justification of the conduct of the research. We want to make sure the experimental components are all identified and authenticated properly. Again, these are more qualitative, subjective checks that we want to make sure this information is in place, or at least in place, so when it comes out to peer review, the peer reviewers can decide if the information is valid. And then when we get to peer review itself, of course, we get a lot of comments from authors. We had like peer reviews provide 7,000 words of comments to a paper that we received back from them a couple of days ago. We have to check the completeness of those. You know, has anything been overlooked, particularly when you've got that much text? It's really hard to spot whether or not the statistical methods have actually been fully evaluated. And we want to surface and summarize major issues to make sure that those are understandable to authors, but also to the external readers of these open reports that we're making publicly available. I won't dwell on what those reports look like, but the bottom line is we get a lot of summarizing and trying to see gaps in review as we distill all these different reviewer comments down into kind of structured evaluations that are readable by third parties. The things we don't check are things like AI generated text, very hard for us to see. Citation veracity, there's no way as an editor I can go through 60 to 80 citations per paper and make sure they're all appropriate. Image manipulation is really hard to identify. Really anything subjective, anything that has to be done dozens of times, really hard for editors to handle well. And with that, we're going to ask how I can help and what are the potential pitfalls. And I'm going to hand you over to Richard and Nick, and I think we'll be starting with Richard.
Thanks a lot, Paul. It's very nice to be here. Let me just throw this up first of all, and then we can get on with it. So just by a quick level of introduction, hopefully you can all see the screen. Quick level of introduction. My name is Richard Bennett. I'm the Chief Growth Officer for a company called Hum. We're going to be talking, both Nick and I, we're going to be talking about a product called AlchemistReview. But just stepping back a little bit, just a background on Hum. Hum is a technology company. We've been existing and working with the application of AI to essentially content-rich organizations for about 5 years. And we started out very much doing the content understanding and the tagging of content for publishers to be able to analyze and capture behavioral data. Through that process, we found that we could actually do a lot more with the manuscripts that we were working with, and that led us to be able to kind of develop pieces of work that then come into AlchemistReview, and then we're going to share that today. Stepping back a little bit, I mean, one of the questions we were trying to answer is really, you know, where and how far can AI go as far as the actions that could lift some of the burden that we're seeing in the market that is placed on editors. We're also seeing things like, obviously, a large proliferation of paper mills there is a significant amount of use of, almost, I don't want to categorize it as bad use, but there is some dangerous use of AI, and you don't want to have manuscripts, and certainly not published manuscripts, that are floating around and being applied into tools, into language models externally, without any sort of control over them. But if we're looking at the actual market itself, there's been a rapid proliferation of tools that have been or are applied to manuscripts. You've got everything from kind of detecting AI-generated text within the manuscript, so things like GPT-0 are doing work in this area. There are tools to look at statistical and methodological flaws within the paper, so looking at actually running the statistical analysis within the paper and then outputting an analysis on the back of that. Obviously, image manipulation is a significant challenge across the market. I mean, it's been one for a significant time. There are tools like Proofig, Image Twin, that are looking at things like Western blot image manipulation, looking at duplication of images across publications. And then we're looking at, you've had the Authenticates of this world looking at plagiarism. They're now looking at using things like pattern matching to be able to look more sophisticatedly at things like plagiarism. These are all incredibly good tools and useful tools, and they're very much, there is a small action needed on a manuscript, and these tools are fitting that point. For us, we sit in a very different kind of an associated but slightly different application of AI. What we're looking at is, rather than looking at a very specific tool, what we're looking at is a persona. So in this case, an editor doing their function, looking at actually reviewing a manuscript and looking at what we could be able to do to be able to extract information and understanding from a manuscript that will allow them to be able to do their job in a more efficient, more consistent way. So for myself, both Nick and I will be talking about AlchemistReview. However, AlchemistReview is two things. It also combines services from our partners in Grounded AI, which is where Nick will come in. So what it is an AI-powered system. So it is an editor assistant. So it is designed for an editor to be able to assist an editor in that first triage and that first assessment of a manuscript. It does three different things. We will go live, so we will, always good and useful to try and do a live demo in all of these things. But to give you kind of an overview of what the tool is consisting of, it's consisting of a textual analysis of the manuscript itself, looking at being able to structurally assess the manuscript and extract intelligence that will help an editor in the understanding of the contents of the research paper itself. It's a citation evaluation, so this is what Nick will cover. So it's looking at all the references within the paper. It's being able to do an extraction of the metadata and present kind of an understanding of the metadata and the structure of that, and then also looking at the contextual applicability and relevance of those references as they've been cited within the works. And the final part is a combination of we're using AI to be able to do the extractions, but we're also applying AI within the tool itself. So the full manuscript is inserted into a chatbot that can be inquired from the tool itself. And then you can also be able to send inquiries over externally into OpenScholar to be able to get information in the environment from a wider external source of published materials. The tool it's not production at this moment in time. It is being used in live submissions, so we're between a development kind of platform and a full production environment. The only real difference that we see as far as this is the scale. At the moment, we're using a relatively low scale with a number of different partners. We're working with the editors from this. So the core group that were developing the tool itself were American Physical Society's Institute of Physics Publishing and American Institute of Physics. The actual project itself came and was originally started from a piece of work that we did with Oxford University Press, which was called Distilled Knowledge. And Distilled Knowledge was a project where we were taking full text manuscripts and essentially extracting the understanding, so the most entity dense version of that manuscript, into a 6 or 7 sentence summary. And that summary you'll see as far as it's the advanced summary within the tool itself. We will have American Society of Microbiology coming on board with 2 journals. They'll launch at the end of this month, and then IEEE Access will be the big one that we'll also be launching at the beginning of August. So moving over into so this is all nicely theoretical. It seems interesting, but what does it actually do from an editor perspective? So we're in the tool itself. The process of bringing the materials into the tool. So we have a direct feed from the submission platform. It comes into our environment. We run it through our services. We also work through the citation analysis from Grounded, and we bring it all together to be able to be displayed into this environment. And this environment has been designed and is for an editor. So it is very much focused on the kind of outputs that an editor might need in the assessment of the manuscript. 2 points for security. It is a secure environment, so it is a private instance that we create for each of these projects, each of these journals. We also hold all of the models that we interact with in a private environment and private cloud environment. So essentially, we are making sure that unpublished research isn't floating out and it's not going out to large language models external. So we are controlling the environment that we're working with. So for each of the extractions, we are using the full text of the manuscript plus a series of prompt engineering that we've done. We're using, for the manuscript digest, we're using around about 5 or 6 different models that we will do for different actions on the manuscript. But the tool itself, in this first window, is the rendering. So we've taken one of Paul's articles, so from his journal, so Evidence-Based Toxicology. You have a full rendering of the manuscript in this first window, so there's always accessibility of the original manuscript while you're going through this process. The first window takes a little while. So this is essentially the textual analysis that we've done over the top of this. Obviously, one caveat, this was a published work, so you would hope that there aren't significant flaws within the paper itself. But obviously, you have with live manuscripts and submitted manuscripts, you have quite a diversity of outputs, but this will give you a good flavor of what the tool can do. It does a couple of different things. So the first is it's using an ability for it to give some sort of structural assessment of the paper itself. So in this case, you've got the paper type. So it's classifying the paper according to the paper types that are associated with the journal. We also then do things like structurally, like we're extracting the key concepts. So this is the extraction of the key named entities that we found within the paper. So hopefully it will also give a good citing to the applicability of this manuscript for this journal. The other part that's really kind of useful to look at, so we're doing an extraction, we do 2 different summaries, and they play 2 slightly different roles. The general summary is there for essentially scope check and assessment of the scope. So is this a good match with the journal? Does it fit with the subject areas and the input and the type of research that this journal was looking to publish? It's not a lay summary. It's written essentially a science news level reader. So you do have an element of understanding of the area, but you don't need to be a heavy expert. It's there also potentially for things like transfer, if you're wanting to transfer manuscripts between journals. But it also gives you, if you've got a triage step in the editorial process, then it gives you a good opportunity to be able to use that and have a non-expert understanding the paper. The advanced summary is where you, as a subject expert, would spend the time. This is the output from the work that we did with Oxford University Press. So this is essentially the distilled knowledge output. And it goes further than the abstract. So it is essentially the most entity dense rendering of the full text of the manuscript. It will bring in aspects of the abstract, but it also will do extractions from the entirety of the paper. It'll also bring together things like methodologies and conclusions that have been extracted as well. We're using these kind of as citing points. So assuming that it gives you good high level summary to be able to assess the validity of the manuscript. The first stage you may want to be able to check as an editor is then looking at the significance and scientific relevance of this paper. So for that, what we're doing is doing the extraction of the author contributions. Now, author contributions in this case are the author asserted relevance or significance of the research. So these are the things that the authors are claiming that is new, novel, significant. It's not, it doesn't at this moment in time, although we will be doing it, it doesn't do kind of a novelty categorization based on the known art within the field. But it does give you an idea of being able to extract what the authors are asserting as the key contributions. Assuming that you have a reasonable level and it seems to have significance within the area of research, the next stage is obviously assessing the rigor, the scientific process that's been utilized within the paper. So for that, what we're looking at doing is being able to assess the paper and look at being able to extract the key methodologies that have been applied. It'll do two things. It'll extract the key methodology, but also use the contextual application of that methodology to be able to give you a good overview of exactly what's being assessed within the paper itself. So hopefully it will give you a good idea of whether the conclusions, whether the author claims are actually validated or potentially validated by the methodologies being used. The citation analysis viewpoint I'll leave, because we'll go on to that when Nick moves on to the kind of citation evaluation tab. But you have essentially a summarization of any potential citation or reference issues that within the paper that will flag up on this first page. And the final two sections is where we're really trying to start to use some of the more deep thinking models. It's starting to ask the question of within the bounds of something that an author could potentially address, can the models be able to make a recommendation of areas where there is either some critical or key weaknesses within the research itself, or whether there's aspects that need to be remedied before they need to move it forward. Now, this is an area which we're working on quite significantly, and it will be advanced with conversations with Paul. Even there's probably three areas. There are things like experimental kind of changes that you may want to have recommendation. There's further analysis that you maybe want to do, and then other general kind of aspects of language and cohesion and coherence around the paper. So we'll see this advancing. At this moment in time, it's one of these places where we're working significantly with the editors that we're working with to be able to understand what's valuable and what's useful. The last aspect of the actual digest itself, it then does a clarity. So it'll do a writing quality and readability. Obviously, this was a published work, so you would expect that everything is coherent, but this will actually do a final check, so it could be able to give you. The whole concept of this is that it gives you a really good rounded view that you can be able to do a first assessment. It also can be used, and I'll talk about this at the very end of this kind of process of this webinar. It can be used to be able to be applied into process stuff, so that you can actually have differential processes built off the data that has been extracted that can actually start organizing submissions into different buckets as they're coming into the journal itself. From that, I will hand over to Nick, who's going to take you through the citation side of the tool.
That's great. So, you can see me, right?
Yeah.
Cool. I wasn't seeing my camera working before, but that's great. Next test, can I share my screen? Let's go. We did do a technical checks before this, but then my browser crashed, so I've got to try again now live. So, can you see my screen?
Yeah, we got you.
That's
yep,
awesome.
We got you.
Cool. So I'm going to go through the goals of the citation evaluation piece. I'm going to talk about the process we run, so you can understand from a high level how we actually verify citations. And then we're going to go into some examples, some interesting examples, both in the positive and in the negative. And as Paul has said, very relieving that in this first paper that Richard's showing us, it's going to be a good example of everything is a clean set of verifications. And that will give us a good place to start understanding exactly what we're doing in terms of citation evaluation and what we expect to see. And then we can go into some examples of maybe finding things that we don't want to see, but getting ahead of those, finding out what we can do with those. So I think Paul teed us up really nicely at the beginning there when you said citation veracity, and the task of checking through 60 to 80, or in our case sometimes many hundreds of citations, doing that by hand, checking those various checklist items is something that is actually infeasible, and it's a symptom we're seeing in the industry, that there's so much going on under the radar of editors in terms of the sort of integrity of citations, the quality of citations. And so I want to just start by pointing out what are those checklist items. If we double click on Paul's citation veracity piece, what are those aspects that we want to know as editors before we make a decision on this manuscript? And so what we understand is it's things like who and what is being cited, right? Journals or authors, especially anything notably high, and we've got to figure out what notably high means. There are all kinds of differences between journals and editors here, but I think that's part of the journey, is we're going to figure out what these thresholds are as a community, and so we can figure out where to set the line. So be that self-citation or just certain authors or journals being cited overly, we want to be able to figure that out. Are there any potentially fake citations in this work? This is another crazy thing that we're seeing as an industry. It's a symptom of flagrant or improper AI use, and it's something we're seeing a lot more day to day. So we need to check that citations are real. Are there any citations which are completely irrelevant or wildly out of context? And this is, Paul has sort of said that there are certain things in the checking menu that may be subjective, and I think this is another area. Relevance is extremely difficult to really agree upon in some cases, but we're working on that, and we've got some interesting solutions, I think, to that problem. Couple more things you want to know as an editor: is there good coverage of the literature here? Is the literature review satisfactory? And other obvious things, right? Are there any retracted references here? Any obvious credibility concerns? So we are focused on helping editors answer those questions quickly and at scale with this tool. So those are the goals. Now, what's the process here? I think that'll help contextualize what we're going to be showing you in terms of the content of this piece. But essentially, we will take in the raw manuscript. As Richard said, we're kind of hooked up to the supply line of submissions. And I think that's a point to really hammer home here, is that these analyses can now be run on the very first submission that you receive from an author. And that means that we can actually run this process and populate these results for editors before they even land on their desk, right? So any alerts can be compiled ahead of time, and this can be an immense time saver. Flag up anything which you're going to need to know before you waste a whole bunch of time on it. So that's the first bit, is we extract and recognize all the citations and how they're being used from the raw manuscript. Once we've done that, the second step is we then go out to the wider world. We've got to actually resolve those citations, right? If these are references, they've got to refer to something real that we can find. And so we will go through third-party databases, most of which will be familiar to us. Some of them we're going to go further afield and go into sort of more nooks and crannies of the internet. There's all sorts of things that get cited, not just sort of easily findable English-speaking academic records, but we do our best to find everything that's being referred to. And then finally, once we've found those sources, we can then start analyzing. We can ask the questions. How does the content of this citation align with the author's statements? Are there any credibility concerns associated with that reference, and so on? And that's how we end up at this result that you're seeing. So we've now run that process, and this gives us set of outputs which we can put in front of the editor. So I'm going to start walking through those now. So we've got a high level sort of overview of a sort of traffic light system that we've adopted. Very typically, things which are green or neutral, these are going to be things we can quickly verify as editors as really being not of concern. First thing we see is a statistical overview of who's being cited, and I mean the authors and the journals. And this is simple, but it's extremely effective. We talk to editors who are actually counting authors in reference lists by hand. And of course, you know, that's just it's very repetitive, and any particularly high or concerning author counts here will jump right out of you. So this is one of our sort of most loved features. And an interesting thing to note here is that because we're doing the job of actually mapping what the author has provided out to the real world, we can get all of the extra metadata. This is a point that Richard was alluding to. So we will see authors pop up in this count that we might not even see written in the references because they're hidden behind et al. And this actually becomes pivotal in some extreme cases of self-citation. We're going to see an example of that in a moment. But going through these stats, being able to see just the lay of the land in terms of publication years, again, very simple, but very effective. We find that editors have a good intuition in their field about the kind of recency level they're expecting. There's it's normal to have a few older references, you know, maybe going back into 80s, 60s, especially in physics or maths. In certain fields, you'll really be wanting to see quite a few papers, you know, published even as recent as this year, you know, but certainly within the last 2 or 3 years. In some fields are less fast moving. So you'll be able to gauge that as an editor based on this recency graph, something we hear a lot of good things about. And then as we get down here into the detail, we can start to see all of the citations we've extracted, and we can drill into how they're used. It's quite convenient. And in this case, really everything is fine. We've been able to find these sources. They're not retracted. They seem to be contextually relevant, and so forth. And as I double click on this one here, I think this is just a demonstration of the capability I mentioned earlier. So in this case, we're able to show the editor that this is a self-citation for 4 of the authors on the paper, whereas actually only one of those authors is visible within the reference that the author provided because of the use of et al. So, you know, it just shows, I think it's a simple demonstration of how much we can show to editors by augmenting the data within the manuscript. And I think that this is very nice. So this is an example of everything's great. Now, let me switch to, I've got a couple of interesting examples lined up. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I think they'll come up in the questions. I just want to be topical. You know, this is a thing that's been in the news. We've had this book that's been retracted recently, based on the claim that it contains a lot of fake citations. So of course, being marketing savvy, we've processed that for AlchemistReview, and just so that we can entertain ourselves with the results. So I'm now switching to the result of that analysis. So this book obviously has many chapters. This is one said chapter. Go into the citation evaluation here, and I can see immediately, without doing anything, there's some red flags here. That's great. So let's go down and have a look. So I mean, there's not too much to say here. There's essentially no clean match for this reference, and we see this time and time again throughout this book, and indeed through many papers that we're publishing right now in production. There is a lot of complexity to actually finding and resolving references. There are things which are not well indexed in certain journals. There are certain, especially foreign language and Chinese references, very difficult to find. Certain types of sources that maybe they might be manuals, they might be old PDFs, they might be code and data sets. But in this case, this is something which we have very clean reference, very complete. It's in a journal which we have been able to resolve and understand to be indexed, well indexed by our favorite databases, yet we cannot find an exact match. We can find a close match, which is often a troubling sign, as AI likes to sort of regurgitate these semi-real references. In fact, this reference has the exact same title. It's an archive preprint. It's not from this journal, but it has completely different authors. It's something we see a lot. So you see one of these, could it be an author error potentially? When you see 10 of these, 20 of these, massive red flag, and it very, very rarely ends well for the authors. So I think that's a great example. And as I say, there's other examples about relevance and things, but I'm going to be cautious of my time here. I'm just going to open up the floor to Paul if you've got any queries there on what I've shown, and then I know Richard, you've got a couple more things to talk about before we sort of go free form, but I'll stop there.
Thanks, that's really good, Nick. I'm going to hand straight over to Richard, I think. I don't have any questions right now. I'm just, there's a Q&A in the chat, which I'm responding to. I don't know if either of you two want to provide an answer to that as well.
I'll take a look.
You want to take a look while I just wanted to finish off. There's a couple of things that I just wanted to flag up, which is the following on from kind of Nick's part. So obviously we do have the citation evaluation. We've walked through most of the tool. However, I just wanted to share that there is, a slightly interesting, different way of being able to assess a manuscript. So built into the tool itself is an AI chat. So there's two different things that are loaded into it. So the full text of the manuscript is loaded into it, and you also have the ability to query Open Scholar. So in this case, I just did a couple of questions and queries. So in this case, it's just asking it to extract the passages of manuscript that are associated with applied computational text processing, and essentially it'll go off and it'll actually start bringing out the aspects of the paper itself that flag up these areas of for this application of the methodology. You also then can do an external search. So this is querying Open Scholar externally. So this is looking at, in this case, it's looking at the field. So where there are the examples of work on environmental health vocabulary externally. It doesn't actually have specific examples of published works that are associated with it, but it starts to be able to lead you into other areas where there might be interesting information that you may want to consider. It will be really interesting to see how editors embrace this. We've seen, as you could probably imagine, a very distinct split. There are some editors that are using it and using it heavily and think that this is a brilliant way of being able to interrogate a manuscript to be able to get what they want out of it. Other editors ignore it completely and just think that that's not actually something that they can be able to utilize at this moment in time. We will kind of continue to address this. We'll continue to assess it and to be able to see what the kind of outputs are going to be and how valid and useful this might be. But it is there, it's available to be able to use. And I'm always interested to see how people feel about kind of chats within these environments. Just a little bit of the kind of feedback, I suppose, just to share what we're seeing from the testing that we're doing. We've got kind of different aspects. One interesting thing is kind of journal value, where we're starting to see the most applicability tends to be in the kind of higher volume external editors, broad journal scope. So this is where you have, this significant volume coming through, although there are things like citation analysis, which Nick's been looking at, which seem to have universal appeal, obviously, because you're needing to have that assessment done on every single paper. And I think it's a useful, and even more, it's becoming absolutely critical into the assessment of the manuscript itself. Aspects of things like methodology is kind of well liked by the associate editor persona. So we're starting to see different individuals that are interacting with the editorial process being interested in different sections of the tool itself. The only last thing I was going to share with you, which is once you get a comfort level with the extractions, and there's a comfort level with what's been created and what's been extracted and how valid those responses are, you can start doing really more interesting things. So you can not only can you do it individual manuscript by manuscript, but you can actually start thinking about looking at manuscripts as they're coming into the process, so as submissions flow in, and you can actually start making evaluations on this. So one of the things that we're going to use it for, rolling out at the end of this year, is journal fit. So you can actually, it's 4 different criteria, so relevance to scope, significance and impact, originality and novelty, and scientific rigor. So what it will do is it'll make this assessment, it'll run the actual tool over the full manuscript, and then it'll start making this assessment on these 4 base criteria. And this will be really quite interesting. So, things like driving transfer. So hopefully it will flag up things that are coming out of scope without you even having to spend much time on it. But also then it'll start looking at, okay, well, it'll start giving reads into things like originality and novelty, which I think comparing it, and that's not just comparing against what the author's assertion is of novelty, but it'll actually start looking at the external known field, looking at external research, and start being able to make an assessment. Again, these are all interesting aspects, but what we are needing to do in the first instance, make sure that absolutely core validation, that a human, an expert, is going to validate and gets comfortable with the outputs that we're creating. The last part, which also is related to kind of scope, you'll start seeing related papers coming into this. So that's another aspect that we'll be presenting. So this is looking at actually the full text content assessment and start to bring in the most related published papers that are associated with this manuscript. So it should also, we're going to use it for novelty assessment, but it's a good way of being able to assess what's the known art in this field. You know, for an expert that is absolutely core in, might not be that useful. They might know the key papers. Some it might give 2 or 3 papers that they didn't see. But if you're slightly, you know, if it's a field that's tangentially associated with the area you're working in, it might be a really good, useful area to be able to indicate the kind of papers and further reading that might be useful to be able to assess the paper itself. So those are the kind of interesting last pieces that I just wanted to share. I'm going to come off share so that I can see you all.
Very good. Thanks, Richard and Nick. This is excellent. So we've got a few questions in the chat. We had a question in the Q&A. I've got a mere 6 questions scribbled down in front of me, but I think probably best to go straight to the audience. I think an interesting question from Rob Wright and a related one from Catherine Jones. So Rob, if you're there, I will try and unmute you so you can ask it directly, because I think it's quite a complicated question that I think you're asking. I don't want to get wrong exactly what it is that you're aiming at. So if I allow your mic, you should now be able to speak, I think, if you just unmute yourself. Hopefully.
Yes.
Yes. Splendid.
I got it. So yeah, I was really intrigued, Nick, with the sort of dashboard showing, you know, different ways of assessing related to citation recency, kind of literature coverage. And, you know, I do a lot of systematic review work. So just wondering if there are sort of ways to calibrate that, you know, if there are different sort of assessment workflows for different types of manuscripts that you're looking at, and if there are special challenges around evidence syntheses, systematic reviews, scoping reviews, things like that.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Well, what we do at the moment is very general, in the sense that, as Richard said, there are these questions about citation quality and integrity that you must ask of every work. But I think when it comes to assessing evidence synthesis, systematic reviews and the like, I think you have to invoke a few more questions about the quality of citations, right? And you talk about coverage, and I think that's the key. You know, we provided a very simple view of citation recency there, but I think topical coverage is something which is a really interesting, well, it's an interesting challenge, but something that I think, you know, has been of the interest of researchers for a very long time. And it's basically, how can we, you know, feel that we've got a good coverage of the different areas, thematic areas within the research space that we would expect to be covered by a good synthesis of this topic. And you'll find a lot of research on this, but you know, it's certainly something that I think we can provide an answer to. I think there are things that we can do, and I think we'd be looking to work with. That's very much our approach with the AlchemistReview project, is to find people like yourself to work with on those questions. You know, would this be a useful output? Would this be a useful output? But I think topical coverage, in addition to time, and one of the things that we get asked a lot about, which is in the roadmap, is citation suggestion. So if you're an editor, you're reviewing potentially a literature review or a systematic review, you might want to see, okay, there are actually these 3 citations for this point, which might not have been used by the author, but actually could stand to be in there. And actually, it might be the question of, why aren't these present? You know, these are also really recent, high quality studies supporting the point you're making. Why aren't they present? And that's another sort of editorial level check, or maybe it's more of a peer review level check. You know, I think that's also a question. But anyway, so definitely yes, we want to work more on assessing coverage, but you know, it's coming.
Yeah, and I think, these things are intriguing for practitioners. So someone who, like me, builds searches, I have ways that I assess the quality of that search, but this could add to that. So that's interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I'm going to skip down to. Okay, so we have a question that someone's saying they see a need for authors to rebut any comments. I think maybe I can field that because I'm the editor, right? So there was a similar question actually in the Q&A about what happens if you've got like legitimate self-citation and things. So as an editor, I would view all of these systems and tools as providing me with information that help me make a good decision that I wouldn't otherwise have reliable access to, right? So the buck stops with me. So what the say like Nick's tool shows that there's lots and lots of like self-citation in a given paper. That's just a fact or a data point, which I wouldn't necessarily be directly aware of or be able to quantify as an editor if I didn't have this tool. And then I can just say, I can just use that information for making decisions. I can look at the paper and be like, well, this is a very prolific lab. They're using their own kit. It's an area of innovation at the front end of. It seems to be pretty natural for them to do quite heavy self-citation in this space. I could maybe ask them to tone it down a bit or add some other relevant citations if they're oversighting. But it just kind of gives me a sense of what's actually going on in a paper. And then for other things where you may have like some of the LLM supported recommendations for revision and things like that, that would all be fed back to the authors in the editorial review and peer review process that we run anyway. So this isn't, certainly for evidence-based toxicology, this isn't information we would keep secret. We would figure out a way of making all this like available to the authors, so all of the reasons for the comments and things that we have and the revisions that we're suggesting are present. I don't know how it would work at journals that maybe don't share this level of information with authors, so journals that don't have like open review processes and things, that might be more difficult. But then without open review processes, it can be harder to have this rebuttal process anyway. But I don't know, Richard, or if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, really useful. I mean, there's one aspect where you have full openness, and I really actually I would love this to be made available to all of the kind of participants in this process of review. I think that would be the exciting end point. In the near term, there's an option to be able to cut out and easily cut and paste any sort of potential feedback that that's an extraction to be able to be flagged back up to the author. My assumption would be that there'd be an opportunity to, in the long term, when we're doing full integration with the editorial systems, is that there'll be a flag to author. They would get the specific passage which is under question, and there would be the ability for the editor to be able to add a little comment about clarity that may want to go back into the author to get them to clarify the author's position on a certain extraction or something that was flagged as potentially questionable. So I think the whole idea of the system is both modular and structured so that you can be able to pass information backwards and forwards between the system and other parties. Ultimately, it'd be great. I mean, the idea that this is a living aspect that can be added to by the editor, that can be augmented, that could be potentially seen by the author, and then also passed into the review process would be the ideal end point, I think, from my perspective. But then I'm very much on your side with open review and having a level of transparency that really will help the process.
Okay, thanks. So I think, being way too plugged into this stuff, perhaps, I think one of the questions that might also be interesting to discuss is actually like tool validation, right? Because people say, using these tools as editors, like these tools are giving you, supposedly facts about a submission. And then these facts, some of them are quantitative measures of citation, like naughtiness or whatever. Some of them are quite qualitative, like summaries of what the LLM or the system thinks a paper is saying. Then obviously I'm trying to use that for making decisions. Like, how would you view like the validation challenge in like understanding how well these tools are working, given the multiple tasks they're doing, the type of data they're dealing with, and the fact they're involved in the decision-making process? Like, how do we do this stuff in a way that's credible, auditable, responsible, and the rest of it?
Well,
Let's go with Nick first, Richard, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that actually that's most of the job, Paul. Actually building these features in today's world is, it's doable quite efficiently, because the AI is extremely, powerful to build prototypes, but actually to build something which we can validate and trust and benchmark is a huge amount of work. That's never changed. And so a lot of the day job for us actually is building these benchmarks, is figuring out how do we measure how good our relevance flagging is? How do we make sure that when we flag up a source in red because it's not been able to be found, how do we make sure that's not just us, our system, not finding it, and we're doing it in service by the author or by the editor? And so, basically behind the scenes, we break the task up into all these separate subtasks, and they're all heavily tested and benchmarked. And every day we're finding new edge cases, we're educating ourselves, we're building in more guardrails. Everything that comes out of an AI model behind the scenes that we use has to be heavily verified. If we ask our AI systems to extract all the citations from a manuscript, we need to actually be able to go back and make sure that all of those things match exactly with the manuscript. In other words, the AI hasn't hallucinated anything. Absolute disaster. All of these are, that's absolutely the sort of advantage. That's probably the competitive advantage of the AlchemistReview system, is built mostly on validating that these things actually work and are trustworthy. And it's an ever-going battle.
But, so just to ask an awkward question. So, I mean, we demand a very high level of transparency from our submitting authors, right? So we don't like black box research, and we say, publish your data, publish your methods. Obviously, there's a lot of data and a lot of method. What do you think you can do or do you think you're doing enough, or do you think you can do more to kind of surface what metrics and measures you're actually using and kind of communicating in some way that's kind of externally verifiable actual system performance, right? Because you say that you do a lot of work on this is great, and I'm sure that you do, but if we said to an author, well, you've not performed very well here, and they said, no, that's wrong, and then contested it and said, well, how do you know that we've done badly? And I say, well, Nick just works very hard at this. They might not be entirely satisfied. So
absolutely, that's an excellent challenge, and it would be good to get Richard's take on this as well. But I know that internally at Grounded AI, we go through this tension a lot, and how open should we be with our benchmarks? And there are all sorts of benefits to publishing white papers on what we're doing here. And there are all sorts of potential downsides, they're mainly sort of pushed upon us by our sort of business thinking and our sort of investor type thinking. This is something that we want to stay ahead on. And I think we've got to basically figure out a good balance between what we can sort of, what's the line between IP that we want to maintain as a business versus stuff we want to open up to the community to basically show the trustworthiness and effectiveness of this system. And that's an answer, as I don't know the answer to that exactly. I think probably the brave and bold thing to do is to be more open than we would feel comfortable. I think that's probably going to win the respect of you asking the question, right? I think we should probably be more open. That's my gut feeling.
I think more open than is comfortable is a good rule of thumb for dealing with researchers, right? Anyway, Richard.
No, I was gonna show a little bit so there are aspects built into all of this into the tool as well. So as editors are, because it's very, very difficult. We need the experts within the field to be able to provide the validation. Is this a reasonable extraction? We believe that it can be, and we can validate to a certain degree, but then we get outsides of our field of expertise. So what you have within system is also thumbs up, thumbs down, essentially, and kind of responses on every single extraction that we're creating. It is also for the citation evaluation. So as editors are in system and they're presented with information, they also can flag up if we're starting to see things that are kind of that shouldn't be coming up, and they shouldn't be valid. They're non-valid. So we are very much looking and assessing all of that. The editors are generally pretty damn good about actually giving feedback and being able to use this, and we do get a lot of feedback from this. So, you know, and one of the aspects is really starting to find ways of, you know, avoiding and reducing the amount of let's say non-correct you know, aspects of extraction that we're creating. So I think that we are building it, and that's half of what we're doing at the moment with this. This is the reason why we have not gone full into production, and we're in this phase of validating with editors in live use, so that they can give us this consistent feedback over and over again. So and we share that with every journal that's working with, every publisher that's working with us. So you know, that feedback is open and available for us to be able to do that. It might be that there's some sort of way of being able to represent that more widely from a public facing view as well. So I think that there's, but as Nick said, it is half of the battle is to make sure we, you know, to make sure that there are experts understanding, seeing the outputs and validating those outputs, and that's the only way that we can feel that we can truly make a judgment on how accurate those pieces and those analyses are.
Very good. Okay. Sounds like there will be an equilibrium established between user needs, IP concerns, and the other factors that will be kind of converging in this, right? So good. It's a moving space. I think that probably puts us 2 minutes before the hour, so I think it gives us just enough time to thank you for your presentations and conversation. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the participants. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions. Please do follow up with the links that I shared. And we'll be posting this webinar on our YouTube channel in the next week or so. And I hopefully will be able to email you when that happens. So thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your weeks. And we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar, I think. Take care.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.